Okay, we'll call the Shakopee City Council meeting for August 7th, 2024 to order. If you want to please take the roll.
Councilmember Delaney.
Here.
Councilmember Whiting.
Here.
Councilmember Contreras.
Here.
Councilmember Laura.
Here.
Mayor Lehman.
Here. Item number 2, stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 3, approval of agenda. Any changes to the agenda?
Nothing from staff, sir.
Council?
I'll make a motion.
Councilor Contreras?
Yep, I'll make the motion to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item number 4, consent business. Any modifications to the consent business, Mr. Lara?
Nothing from staff, sir.
Okay, Mr. Lara?
Yeah, I'd like to pull A3.
4A3?
4A3.
Mr. Whiting?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent business as modified.
Is there a second? Mr. Delaney? Before we get there, is there any other changes from council? Seeing none? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Reynolds will now read the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. These are the consent agenda items for August 7th of 2024. 4A1 are the City Council minutes. 4A2 is appointment to the Logis Board. 4A4 approves a temporary liquor license and street closures for the TAP 2024 event. 4A5 is the Minnesota Department of Public Safety's Crisis Response Grant Program application. 4B1 approves a wetland replacement plan and a wetland credit purchase for Wood Duck Trail Extension. 4B2 approves a master service agreement with consultant pool firms. 4B3 approves an extended construction hours for 2nd Street and Lewis Street parking lot improvement project. 4B4 approves a license agreement with the SMSC for L16 levy maintenance. 4B5 accepts proposals from WSB for development construction inspection services. 4B6 approves a final payment and a contract completion for the 12th Avenue Driveway Consolidation Improvements Project. 4B7 approves waiver of special assessment appeal rights for Marist Street, 13th Avenue, and Hanson Avenue Utility Extension Project. 4B8 awards a contractor for the Stannis Tennis Court Resurfacing Project. The Stands Tennis Court Resurfacing Project. 4C1 is a purchase of replacement shade canopies for Sand Venture. 4C2 is an award for construction of the Valley Crest Trail. 4C3 awards a contract for make-up air unit for Sand Venture. 4C4 awards contracts to Wick Craft Boards for Jackson Commons. 4C5 awards a contract to Northland Recreation for the Polygon Shelter at Jackson Commons. 4C6 is a 1-month extension on Krause Anderson's contract for Sand Venture. And 4C7 awards contracts for seed mix and park furniture for Jackson Commons. And finally, 4D1 is a lateral police officer hire.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. All right, that will take us to item number 5, recognition of residents of Shakopee on an item not on the agenda.
Did they vote on it?
Pardon me?
Did you vote on it?
We did.
Okay, sorry.
Anybody that's here to talk up to the council on an item not on the agenda, now would be your opportunity to do so. Anybody in the audience? Seeing none. Item number 6, business removed from consent, was 4A3 by Councilmember Lara. Mr. Lara?
Yep. So based off the memo that we received this earlier today, I'm just questioning, does that have anything to do with what we're asked to approve on this memo here for staff?
Are you asking because they may have been failed a compliance check?
Correct.
Okay. I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but I think that we wouldn't want to preemptively take action until we go through that process. Mr.
Right.
Reynolds or Jim Thompson want to weigh in?
Somebody gets their day in court. Yeah.
Go ahead, clerk.
So this is an update to their liquor licensing. They've already had a liquor licensing. It has, this is a compliance check of the this is a different licensing. They're changing it because they're finding a difference in their business, so that's why they're changing their liquor licensing. That's what this approval is for. It has nothing to do with the compliance check. Yes, the failure is not good. It has to do with the training of their staff, obviously, and that process is going to take a while to complete. They have to go through the court process and everything before we can address that compliance failure. So that whole approval process or result of that failure is going to take a long time. We're not going to be able to address that failure until even next year. So to hold off on the approval or the change of their liquor licensing would
Be an excessive.
yes.
Okay, so thank you for clarification. So I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. They already have a liquor license.
They already have.
They are modifying it to something that fits their business model.
Correct.
So we're technically maybe going from here down to here.
Yes, correct.
Okay. I guess with that clarification, then I will make a motion to approve the 3-2 off-sale liquor license for Chaska Market LLC, doing business as Los Ranchos Mercado, located at 590 Marshall Road.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Mr. Delaney, any discussion on the motion? Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item number 7, motion to recess for Economic Development Authority meeting.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Clerk got that? Any discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are in recess for Economic Development meeting. Madam President.
Thank you. I call to order the Shakopee Economic Development Authority meeting for August 7, 2024. Staff, if you could please make note of our role. Number 2, approval of the agenda. Do I have a?
Madam President, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Whiting. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Number 3, have consent business. On that consent business, we have our EDA minutes. Any questions? Motion?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the consent business with the minutes.
Thank you, sir. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Delaney. All right, any discussion on our EDA minutes? No? Okay, motion. All in favor, say aye. Sorry.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Number 4, we won't have any general business. Number 5, our EDA bill list is for us to see. Any questions on that?
No questions for
No
me.
questions on this side? Questions? All right. And if we could have a motion for our adjournment.
I'll make a motion to adjourn till Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024 at 7 p.m.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. There you go.
Good meeting.
All yours.
Good job.
Thank you.
Might have been our new record.
Fine.
We'll reconvene the Shakopee City Council portion, and that would bring us to item 9A1, Riverbank Stabilization Concept Presentation. Looks like our city engineer extraordinaire is going to step up to the plate on this one.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I'm here tonight to give you an update on the Minnesota Riverbank Stabilization Project. This is a project that you all are very familiar with and have a lot of history with. I wanted to provide you an update of where we've come in the last year and what the next steps are in the project. So a little bit on the project history and need. The Minnesota River is an impaired body of water that has eroded about 100 feet near the Holmes Street Bridge over the last 100 years. It's eroded about 40 to 50 feet throughout downtown Shakopee. So that's an extensive amount of erosion and sediment that's been deposited throughout the river, and most of that sediment deposit and erosion is why the Minnesota River is classified as an impaired body of water. Also, with that erosion, there's increasing flood frequency that's leading to accelerated erosion. We're getting heavier storms, more frequent storms that are heavier floods that are causing that erosion to accelerate. Additionally, the Minnesota River is pretty unique in Shakopee. Less than 1% of the water flowing through the Minnesota River actually comes from the city of Shakopee. The rest of the water is everything from upstream in the watershed. You have a lot of rural agricultural properties that are leading to more sediment deposit and heavier storms that are eroding Shakopee in itself. This is a regional problem, not just a city of Shakopee problem. This accelerated erosion poses a risk to parkland, the DNR State Trail, the city's trunk sanitary sewer system, which runs parallel to the river, and also cultural resources that are located along the river. We all know the history of the city of Shakopee and the settlers that have lived along the river, and there's a lot of resources that need to be protected as well. Over the past 5 or 6 years, the city has gone through an extensive master planning effort. These improvements have been identified in the city's Parks Master Plan, the city's comprehensive plan. We've done extensive studies on the river. All of these plans have fed us to where we are today. In addition to that, staff before me have done a really great job of securing outside funding for these improvements. As I mentioned, this is a regional problem, not just a city of Shakopee problem, and we've really done a great job securing that funding to be able to push this project forward. Now, that accelerated flooding, we saw this year. In 2024, we had historic flooding in Shakopee. We provided you guys updates throughout the flood on this in June, but the peak river elevation was recorded on June 28th, and I want you to remember that date because that'll come up in a little bit here. That peak elevation was determined to be 719.5 above sea level, and just for reference, the Minnesota DNR classifies the ordinary high water level as 702, so you're about 17 feet above that average high flow for the river. So you can see what that additional 17 feet in vertical height really did through Huber Park. A lot of you were able to see what that looked like, and I'll show you a little bit about that soon here. That river elevation equates to about the 60-year flood event. So what that 60-year event means, it's the 1.7% annual chance that we could have a storm like that. So that's a very small % chance that we would have a river elevation that we saw this year, but it happened. Those flood impacts really led to impacts within Huber Park. We had to close the park. The DNR trail was closed. The county closed County Road 69 or First Ave just west of downtown Shakopee. We had temporary impacts to the city's lift station and playground at Huber Park, where our public works staff had to construct temporary levees to protect those resources. We also saw increased inflow and infiltration within the sanitary sewer network due to that flooding. And then we had a pretty large effort to clean up Huber Park, not only on the hard surfaces, but also the public works staff just reseeded Huber Park in the areas where we lost all the grass that were inundated by those floods. Some of the impacts that we don't know at this point yet is what the bank erosion was. We need that water to come down to really see the extent of what that river power did. This is a video that's going to show you a little bit of the extent of the flooding in Huber Park. Again, keep in mind that June 28th date for that peak river elevation. This June 27th was the day before the peak, so this was right around the extent of the flooding. As you can see, the flood receding, what it's doing to the grass within Huber Park. And then a few weeks ago still. And this was just a couple weeks ago where the river's starting to recede right back to its banks. So as you can see in those later images, by June 19th, most of that grass along the riverbank had already died off, where we had to go back and reseed those areas. So getting into our project, we have a few goals and highlights that I'm going to show you on the concepts that are put before you here today. They didn't make it in the packet before the meeting, but I printed them out for you just so you could get a closer look at them. Most of them are going to be shown up on the exhibit here on the PowerPoint, but just so you have a closer look. So the project's going to include about 4,000 linear feet of riverbank grading and armoring. That's going to be with hard armoring such as riprap or rock, or soft armoring where we've got some more stabilization that has grass within it as well. The project will include sanitary sewer manhole protection, where we're going to raise some of our manholes and protect them against some of that flooding. There's going to be improvements to the Levy Drive parking lot. This came out of the Parks Master Plan, where we're going to create an art plaza right between the Holmes and First Street bridges, and you'll see that shortly here. The project will include realigning and elevating the DNR State Trail through Huber Park, where we won't have the trail closed when we have lower flooding events. We'll also be including additional pedestrian pathways that will be accessible during flood events as well. The project will include different river touch points and overlooks. This was a pretty critical part of the project because Shakopee is a river town. We want people in the city to be able to explore and get down to the river safely. And right now, the way that Huber Park is designed in other areas, there's really not that accessibility to the river. So this project's going to include some really cool features that allows our residents and other community members to be able to access the river at all times of the year. The project will also include additional native landscaping and ecological restoration. This is a part of the project where SMSC is going to be really heavily involved. We're actually just in a meeting with them and some other tribal members last week where they talked about some ideas to bring back some native seeding that was there pre-development. One of the ideas that they brought up that they just started planting at Hokachadati was turnips, right? That was the term? Yeah, so there's gonna be other different seeding that they'll help us reintroduce back into the environment that was there before settlers came. The project will also include stormwater management improvements and an improved access to the marina, including ADA accessibility down there. So this is an overview of the master plan. This is a concept that we've been developing over the last few months in close partnership with our consultant, Bolton & Mink. I'm gonna go through this exhibit from west to east and show you some of the highlights that we're proposing to include as part of this project. Really what staff is looking for is feedback from the council on where we're at today, what the project includes. We don't need all your answers today, but if there's time over the next months or so that you can really dive into this and give staff feedback, that'll help us progress as we go through this design. So working to the west, just on the far west extents, you can see the Holmes Street Bridge. There's an existing parking lot between Holmes and First Avenue right now that's underutilized. If you go there throughout most of the day, you won't see vehicles parked down there. One of the ideas that came out of the Parks Master Planning is to create an art plaza where we can activate that space, work with local artists to create an environment that's accessible by the public. Also, the DNR State Trail will run right along there, realigned. We'll provide reduced parking, but still provide sufficient parking for the area, and that'll include a river overlook that I'll show you just in a little bit here.
Do you have any numbers on parking?
I believe there's 27 parking stalls that we're proposing, right around that number. Existing today, there's about 35. So we'll be reducing the parking slightly, but still providing adequate parking and also turnaround for vehicles. As we go east of the First Avenue Bridge, the dark black line on your exhibit is the DNR State Trail. So that trail really is going to be elevated, pushed a little bit closer into the park so that it's not inundated during normal flooding events, the 2- and 5-year events that we see every single year that causes the trail to be closed. This trail will be elevated above such that it's accessible year-round. However, we still want community members and residents to be able to get down closer to the river like the trail provides. So the white line that kind of bows out and pushes north of that black trail is a trail that meanders down closer to the river that we'll be able to clean off after post-flooding events, and that can be closed, but still in those normal flow events in the beginning of the year or towards the end of the year, the river will be more accessible. As we go east of the playground and east of the parking lot, this is a really cool feature. These are terraces that basically provide steps down towards the river at different elevations and different points of the year. And then above that, there's a river overlook that pushes out over the river that's accessible even in a 100-year, just under 100-year storm, where if we have those large flooding events like we saw this year, you'd still be able to safely get out and experience the river, go right from the playground right to that area. As we go east of there where it says location 4, that's new stormwater management improvements and native landscaping that'll take a lot of the hard surfaces and treat it before it goes down to the river. We've been working with the watershed to increase some of the stormwater management improvements through the park as well, because there's a lot of downtown Shakopee that goes untreated and directly discharges to the Minnesota River. This will provide us an opportunity to treat that runoff before it goes down to the river. That'll increase water quality downstream. And then on the far right side of your exhibit, is the marina. We're working to create a kayak accessible area in the marina where you can kayak from the marina to the river at certain points of the year. And the dock that goes around the bottom of that marina is an ADA accessible dock ramp that will be accessible at different points of the year. It'll float up and down depending on the water level in the marina. So I'm going to zoom in here briefly and touch on a few locations, and then we'll be able to take questions. So this is that art plaza and parking lot by the Levy Drive parking lot. You can see the Home Street Bridge in the background. This will be able to provide residents access from the art plaza and create a new space that'll be accessible and be directly connected to the river. This is looking down to the west.
Alex,
Yes.
quick question. So if there's flooding, would this be closed off, or is this going to be made where it's going to be somewhat accessible?
Yeah, so actually the existing Levy Drive parking lot wasn't flooded this year in the storm event. It's raised higher up than the areas through Huber Park. So the front of this retaining wall is at the 100-year event. The retaining wall is actually even the bottom of it. It's above the 50-year event. So during a flood condition, this will still be accessible. This next location is connecting basically from the existing amphitheater down towards the river. We're visioning steps or large concrete steps that'll take you down right from the amphitheater down towards that lower trail that I was talking about. So this will provide an area that goes right through the native landscaping that you'll be able to experience that new restoration along the riverbanks, but still provide a safe access down. Now during parts of the year, you'll see that there'll be flooding extents through this area that will be closed off. But because we're going to be proposing hard surfaces, these are things that Public Works can spray off and clean off easily, and not to the extent that it's a large impervious surface.
Will the ponds in this area be then drained to the other area?
Great question. So because of the riverbank grading, we're going to be eliminating those stormwater ponds in that area. So essentially, instead of having a depression, you'll slope right from the river up to the amphitheater. So it'll be an elongated slope rather than having the ponds through that area. And again, seeing the DNR State Trail, rather than being river trail ponds, it'll be river slope up to the trail. So this will be a complete change on the conditions along the riverbank, and we'll be looking at planting trees and landscaping in this area as well along that native seating.
Will we be maintaining those other trails closer to the river so that people can still walk along the river?
Yeah, similar issues is that when the flood does increase, those trails will be inaccessible, but when the river recedes, we'll be able to take a bobcat, and we've designed the trails that will be easily able to be scooped up the sediment that deposits along there, similar to how we clean up the state trail today.
Okay, thanks.
This next location is those terraces that I referenced. So in the back of your viewport, that's the river overlook that's higher than that 100-year event. And these terraces will be accessible at different points of the year. The higher areas will have turf grass where you're not prone to flooding. And as you go lower, you'll have more of the hardscaped impervious surface, whether it's concrete or other rock features. So in a normal low flow event, you'll be able to access the river in an area that is actually really good for viewing. You'll be able to see west and east of the river. We're still refining these concepts and how it actually functions with the stabilization of the bank and restoration. But this is a unique feature that isn't there today in the park. And the trails will connect right from the DNR State Trail, and it'll also connect from the Huber Playground right along the parking lot right to this area.
Can you get around the front of that?
You won't be able to get around to the front of this. That'll go right into the river stabilization, but you'll be able to walk up these terraces to get to the trail, which will take you out through the playground, or through the park, sorry. Then this last location, this is that river overlook. This will extend right from the parking lot that's just northeast of the playground. We're envisioning a lawn area that'll connect to an overlook where we can put different art features or different things that our experiences along the river, different monuments or things like that bring history back to the area. This also tie into the Cultural Corridor Trail that'll bring you right along the riverbank, and this will be accessible throughout the year.
We currently have power there too.
What's that?
There's currently power right there too. Probably
Yes.
changed or utilized in the future, or how's that going to work?
For the electrical that's there?
It looks like a great spot for a little shelter or gazebo or something to me.
Yeah, there certainly could be, and that's a great suggestion.
If we had the power there already, I think I'd like to maintain it there.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
And Axel, I have a question. Do you know if there's going to be lighting integrated? Since there's electrical, will the trails be illuminated at all?
That's a great question. We haven't talked about those level of details, but that's really good feedback. That's exactly what we're looking for ideas to be accessible during the morning or in the evening hours as well.
Safety.
Yep. What I'm going to show now is the extent of the river flooding with these new features. So you can see how the river interacts with the concept design as we see increased flooding. So what I'll talk about is a year flood. So when we talk about the 2-year flood, 10-year flood, 100-year flood, those equates to different river elevations. So just keep in mind, the flood that we had this year was around a 60-year flood. Typically we see each year about a 10 or 20-year event throughout the year. So this is a 2-year flood where even that lower trail is accessible. That's shown in pink. The orange line is your DNR state trail. This next is a 5-year flood event. This is where that lower trail starts to inundate. So when we start to see flooding, that trail would then be closed. You can see the river terraces, and in pink, that's your hardscape, where some of the lower areas of those terraces are inaccessible, but the higher areas in grass are still accessible. This is a 10-year event. This is kind of once every 3 years we get to just above this elevation where that DNR state trail is still accessible, but the lower trail isn't.
And this is current state, right, without any improvements?
This is with the new improvements.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yes.
This is that walkout one.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Yep. And then this is a 25-year flood, so this is starting to get higher elevations. This is around a 716 elevation, so about 3 feet lower than what we had this year. Again, you can see the DNR state trail is still accessible. So this we wouldn't have today with the state trail, the elevation it is. But if we were gonna rebuild this concept in the way we're proposing it, the state trail would still be accessible from Levy Drive all the way through Huber Park. This 50-year event is just below what we saw this year. So now you can see that the state trail is inundated. The playground is still accessible. Some of the terraces are now inundated, but that overlook is still accessible to the public along with the parking areas. So this is pretty much mirroring what we saw this year, but in this concept, some of these improvements are now accessible and that can be used by the public.
This overlook.
And then this is a 100-year flood. We didn't experience this year. This was about 1.5 feet higher than what we saw this year. Under this scenario, most of the improvements would be underwater, which would be expected given the nature of the flooding.
That might change the electrical.
Just like what we had this year, we have electrical that runs through Huber Park. When we knew the river was rising, we were able to turn off that electrical service, so the lights posts that are out there didn't pose a safety threat to the public. Yeah. So we could do similar things here where we could make sure that those facilities are protected. A little bit more updates on the project funding. I wanted to summarize these because I'm not sure if everyone was completely aware of all the things that have happened over the last few years with this project, but the city was approved $8.26 million in state bond funding. We were awarded $3.5 million for an EPA community grant. Just recently, we were recommended to be funded for an additional $1.4 million from the LCCMR grant program. We were awarded $150,000 of watershed-based implementation funding, and that's for the new stormwater management features throughout the park. The total project cost that we're estimating right now is around $17.5 million. However, we haven't truthed that number much further than in concept. That'll be coming next. But based on that project number, what's important is the outside funding, things that aren't funded by city taxes. Over 75% of the project is funded by outside funding, which again, goes back to this is a regional issue, not just a city of Shakopee issue, and the city has done an excellent job of trying to prioritize these improvements while also not putting a burden on the taxpayers in the city. So next steps of the project, we're here tonight to collect feedback from the City Council, and not just tonight, but as you're able to digest this project further, and I'm happy to take questions and answer those and work through some of these concepts. We're also waiting on feedback from the tribal members. Like I said, we met with them last week, and they're reviewing these concepts as well. Throughout the rest of the year, the goal is by the end of 2024 is to finalize this preliminary design so we know what we want to move forward into final design. So then in 2025, we'll be going through permitting. There's an extensive permitting requirements, working through a lot of different agencies based on the funding that we've received and also the critical cultural resources along the corridor. We'll be finalizing our funding applications as well, and then preparing our final design packages so that in 2026, we can move forward and implement the project through construction.
Can we go back to the opening map?
Yep.
It's always beneficial, at least for me, to have this presentation ahead of the meeting, because then you can think about it and ask your questions instead of having, you know, literally 3 to 4 minutes to figure out what your questions might be. So let me start with some questions that I have. The DNR trail that runs through here is paid for by the DNR and maintained by the DNR.
That's correct.
Will it continue to be funded and maintained by the DNR?
That's our plan. We still need to work through things with the DNR with this project, but if we're going to implement some of these changes with the bank grading and stabilization, it's already impacting the trail and its location. So the trail would have to be reconstructed even in its existing condition. So what we're proposing, instead of putting it back at a lower elevation, is working with that grading to reestablish a new location for that trail. So whether the DNR contributes funding for that trail, either way with the bank grading for what we need to do, the trail would be impacted. But long term, we would propose that the trail would still be owned and maintained by the DNR.
Well, and I would advocate strongly that the DNR controls that portion of the trail. And the reason I say that is it's a DNR trail on both sides of it, and the DNR trail rules are different than the city rules.
Yep, exactly.
Second question I have is the marina where you're showing the potential boat launch for the kayaks. Was there any thought about using the existing ramp that's already there?
There was some thought to it. The challenge is we also have some grant funding to make that marina ADA accessible. So in order to do that, we need to upgrade the existing ramp and dock that's out there. And more than likely, that wouldn't meet the accessibility requirements that's tied to the grant funding.
It's a ramp that you back down to the marina.
There's certain design parameters and requirements. We can certainly look at if the existing ramp meets those requirements, but more than likely with some of these changes, we were envisioning that something new would need to be implemented there.
You're going to have a hill on either side that you use.
Yeah, it needs to meet certain grade requirements, though, in order to meet that accessibility, and reestablishing that. The effort would be to maintain that. Whether it meets it today or not, we want to make sure that it does. So if it does meet it today, then it saves the scope of the project.
And does the stabilization of the bank change the elevation of the bank at all?
It does. A lot of the areas along the bank are almost near vertical. What we're proposing is to pull those bank slopes back at a more gradual slope that would reduce the risk of further erosion, especially when we have higher duration storms and that river velocity is maintained. We're studying what that river velocity is at certain points of the river to right size that riprap or hard armoring, and also to establish what that necessary slope should be.
And the slope is in toward the park?
That's correct, yes. And Mr. Mayor, I apologize for not getting this to you before the meeting. We were working on refining things, and I wanted to make sure I brought you a good exhibit at this meeting here today. And I'm fully aware that I wasn't going to expect comments tonight from you guys, but taking some time to digest it. This is an important project. We want to make sure we go through the right steps and get feedback at the right moments.
And the lighting portion, I would think maybe along the DNR portion, but the city closes the park at 10 p.m. That's a city code policy.
Yes.
So we certainly don't want to light it all night long and encourage people to be there after the park is closed.
Some might add a little element of security too, though, so that we can see it.
Yep. Yeah, there's certainly a balance there. While I'm continuing to digest this, questions from other council members? We'll start on this end, Mr. Delaney, then Mr. Whiting.
Sure, 2 questions. First, the south of the holding pond, I guess the new holding pond, location 4.
Yep.
Just kind of to the east. Is that private property that we're thinking about trying to take over? I thought there was some homes.
That's the Pat Thielen Recreation Area of Huber Park.
That's the old rodeo.
Yep.
So that is public property? What was your question? Was it private property?
Yeah, I thought there was some homes or some yardage that kind of...
Way up here, I think you think.
Not along where we're proposing where that trail is. That's all within City of Shakopee property.
Cool, thank you.
Yes.
Next question is, it sounds like we have a $4.3 million shortfall.
That's a $4.3 million of city funds. So within the capital improvement plan that was adopted last year, we're programming park dedication funds, sanitary sewer funds, and storm drainage funds to fund some of these improvements as well.
Okay, thank you.
Waiting.
And I hope we will have another meeting after we digest this, like you talked about. So I'll have more, but I'm concerned we don't want to lose any parking. I know it's underutilized, but we don't want to get caught losing any types of parking. So if we can add any to the street parking or somehow add to that to the Bluff area, that'd be great, or Levy Drive area, I should say. The one concern I have, the pond area, you know, if we have to lose that, that's fine too.
Which pond area?
The pond area for location 2, the ponds that are, the current ponds on location 2, I think that sloping idea is all right, and if it does add with this amenities, the concrete amenities, I think that'll help from any erosion. On location number 4, well, let's jump to 3 for a second. 3, I wonder if we could engineer this to at some point think about having some boat access there. Just to look at that, I mean, we may have to engineer something into that and then do that in the future, but we may not be able to do that if we don't think about it now.
Okay.
Like, I'm thinking riverboat here, but I've tried that trick before. It doesn't work too well, but and then I mentioned the stuff on location number 4 where we have power. I would think that would be a great place for a picnic shelter or some sort of a gazebo or something to utilize that parking lot right there. And then utilizing and that is a named area, the Pat Thielen Recreation Area. That was naming rights done when that park was dedicated, rededicated. Some of this wetland area, there's not much more we can do with that since it is a low-lying area. And these will flood, you mentioned, in some of those flooding.
That's correct.
So I'm looking over here, the pathway where it curls back around and the little creek goes. Is that going under the path? Is that a culvert right there?
Yeah, so that essentially is right where the existing DNR state trail is. There's a natural spring that comes out of that hill, and there's a culvert that goes under the trail. So we're proposing to maintain that spring and that, so that lighter colored water, we're actually trying to see if we can divert some of that spring water into the stormwater features so that we can create some cleaner water and flush that stormwater basin out. But that trail would kind of, whether it's over a culvert or a small crossing, that water level would still maintain under that trail.
Okay, so this would be kind of a natural sediment area for stormwater.
That's correct.
And I'm looking up in here, this area here. If that's a natural culvert area.
The spring is right here.
The Daylight Natural Spring.
I'm looking at the culvert where this creek up here at the top.
At the top, so there is a very large culvert that goes under that existing trail right now. So either we'll maintain that same culvert or have to reconfigure it slightly, but yes, that would still drain out because that spring drains to the marina naturally.
That spring is right here.
Yeah, and then there's a couple of them in there. This turnaround over here, is this just a turnaround? Is there going to be any parking involved with that area?
Yes, good question. So along Levy Drive right now, you've got a gravel parking lot that kind of goes down there, and then it turns around on a gravel. This would be a paved surface extending from Bluff Avenue. There would be a cul-de-sac that we would envision people could park within that turnaround and cul-de-sac along the roadway, but not having certain parking along the street. And it would be mainly
kayak,
for
maybe?
Yep. So if someone came with their kayak, they could park along the road, leave their vehicle, and get into the marina.
Okay. All right, that's all I have for now. I like the idea of the historic signage. Eventually, that might be another grant potential. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned the boat access and the gazebo. So that's all I have for now.
Just one quick question on signage. I know there was discussion about that flood sign that was out in the middle of the, is that?
Yes, so we're looking for a location within this concept that could fit, that you could actually see the river elevations. We were thinking up on that top overlook, but that's a little too high, so we'd have to create something that's more in the ground to be able to use it, but it's going to be placed somewhere in these features that can be seen from the park safely.
During the flooding, I thought of by location number 1, underneath the bridge area where it lowers. That way people can come and look and take their pictures, but we better make it accurate this time.
It'll be accurate and safe, yes.
Mr. Lara?
Alex, you'd mentioned that SMSE has had some input in terms of natural vegetation Any inkling that they might provide any funding?
I'm not sure if that would be the case. Thank you for the question. We can certainly ask. We've partnered with other watersheds and whatnot to get funding for the seeding. It's something that if they have unique ideas, potentially they could look to partner with us on the project. We can certainly ask.
And as far as historic, they've always been great at that, maintaining it, planting it, burning it, I think, in some of the areas. So that may be a good partnership.
Anything else? All right, so next round. So we talk about the grasses from the new aligned DNR trail to the river, and we know that's going to flood. So,
Location 2 you're talking about?
well, just pretty much this area right here.
Yep.
We know that's going to flood. Natural plantings, they're still going to get wiped out.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, great question. So we're going to choose the right type of native seeding that can be flood inundated and still survive. So there's a lot of different seeds that can be planted that can withstand periods of flood and water extents. So rather than just turf grass like we have in Huber Park that can't survive when you're inundated with flooding for multiple weeks, we can choose the right type of native seeding that has the ability to withstand that flooding.
Hydrophilic.
And then, as Councilor Whiting pointed out, I think the gazebo, a small gazebo in that location might be a good idea. People could have a lunch there when the kids are playing or whatever. Back to the marina where that cul-de-sac comes down, I think today you got that driveway and it goes all the way down to the launch, to the ramp. Mm-hmm. And then you've got like parking right here, currently
Storage, yeah.
already there. I don't know why we don't build on that concept. It seems like it's already there. It would be a lot cheaper. And it's if the ramp was on this side where the current one is, you'd be able to park right here, unload, and go right into the marina.
And if you move it over a little onto that right, or, to the, I guess it'd be the east side, you could not block, add the parking on the west side, I guess I should say.
You could have a row of parking right here like you do now today.
Well, I'm saying, block the view, but you could make it work. Whatever's the better view there.
Anything else? Can we get a copy of this?
Yes, so I can give you a PDF copy as well, and it's in your packet that I handed out before the meeting. But if you would like an electronic copy, I can certainly give it to you as well.
You get one of these? Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right, I got one. We will study this, and do we just bring back our comments at a meeting or send
Yeah,
it to
I can
staff?
certainly schedule a meeting in September. We can have another follow-up discussion if council wants to provide their feedback. Otherwise, if council wants to provide feedback directly to staff, we'd be happy to take that as well.
And as usual, I'd like to keep the cost down as much as possible so that we're not overburdening our funds that are park fund.
Let's
It's already
plan ahead, though, like if we want to put some benches in at a later date, which I think would be great. Plan ahead so that we have the potential to do that in the future,
Well, and I think that the DNR's got the boat launch on the other side of the river, and I'd hate to spend money competing with them
Doing double,
and
yep.
taking their headache on as our own. It's much easier to have them have that headache.
What about a fishing pier? Pardon? Fishing pier.
Well, you might be able to fish from up here.
That's what, yeah. So I was thinking instead of
I'm not sure.
riverboat there.
I'm
but
not
you
sure
maybe fish.
if I'm convinced I'd eat the fish out of there just
No,
yet.
but you might be able to get into some grants. Tap into some fishing grants.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. While I was here, I figured I'd just take the moment to just give you an update on Reclamite. Since this was just put down throughout the city, and I'm sure you probably got some questions on it or saw some things as you were driving by Canterbury. So just wanted to provide a quick update just so council is aware and educated and informed on what we did since this was a new application. So over the past week, we've applied Reclamite to the surrounding roadways around Canterbury Park, which was 12th Avenue, Shenandoah, and Unbridled. That occurred on Friday and then yesterday. And then today we finished up an application within Windermere 4th Edition throughout the neighborhood. That was all completed today. So the application process, just so you are aware, I know we talked about this a little bit in the past, but just wanted to give an update. Before we sprayed the application, we went and swept and cleaned off the roadways so that the pavement was clean. We also worked with adjacent contractors and developers to make sure that they weren't hauling. The amphitheater stopped their hauling for the day where we were spraying. So all of our local partners were great throughout this process. In order to put the application down, we had a truck that sprayed down the emulsion straight from the back of the truck. Traffic traffic was then detoured around the newly treated roadways, and then behind that truck, a truck spread limestone screenings, which was basically sand. And what that sand was there for is to provide more traction on the roadway on top of the newly treated surface. So that sand does really nothing to the reclamite at all. It's not part of it. It's just there to make sure that there's traction on the roadways. And then over the next few days, reclamite is then absorbed directly into the pavements, and that is how that pavement is treated with the product. And then they come back through and they have a cleaning truck that sweeps up the sand. So I've got a video of the application process in case you didn't see it and weren't out and about the last couple days. So this is the truck spraying on the emulsion. You can see it's kind of pink in color, sprayed right on the back of the truck. You can see that we were able to maintain a lane of traffic around that vehicle. They had cones out as well that went behind it. And then this is that sand that came right on top behind it that was sprayed right on top of the reclamite. So they went through this process of, they call it training, where they went right behind the reclamite in areas where it was pretty tight so that they could provide that sand so that vehicles could get right on it and then flip traffic to the other side of the road. Through the roundabouts, this is what it looked like when the application was applied and then the sand was completed. So this was before vehicles went on it and the sand kind of got washed away to the sides of the roadways. But this is what you saw if you were out there, and that's that limestone screenings. And that is it. And I can stand for questions, but I just wanted to make sure council was aware and had some more information about that.
How was that funded?
That was funded through our capital improvement program, our SIF funds. Essentially what we did is these roadways were already programmed to receive a chip seal, and that chip seal cost is more expensive than the reclamite treatment was. So in lieu of chip sealing these roadways, we use those funds that were dedicated for that to provide this reclamite treatment.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 9B1, proposal from Scott County CDA for an owner rehab loan program. Mr. Kursky. Julie Siegert, is it? Is in the audience from Scott County CDA. Welcome, thanks for coming. Go ahead, Mr. Kursky.
We received these funds from the state, as you know, as part of the sales tax that was approved by the state legislature and signed into law by the governor. We've gotten our first payment. There's another payment coming. That money has to be dedicated to preservation and creation of affordable housing. We had heard from council previously that one of the opportunities would be to maintain our existing naturally occurring affordable housing and to help people stay in that housing. So Ms. Siegert from the CDA put together a proposal, worked with staff to come up with a program where they would administer our funds in the city of Shakopee for recoverable loans on homes where people would spend $15,000 to $30,000 to do things like replace roofs or mechanical systems. There would be a non-paid second mortgage placed in the property. So if and when that property was sold or refinanced, those funds would come back and it would create a revolving fund that would be blended in future years with the additional state funding that we'll be receiving.
Or the loan could be paid prior to sale and it would be removed from the title?
Correct. Mayor and Council, I've done this in a couple of cities, and it's amazing over time when people either refinance or particularly seniors pass away and estates end up with the homes, those loans do get repaid. And it creates a larger fund that can be used long term.
And the county's going to administer the 80% of or below of defined by HUD for income?
Mayor and Council, yes, so the county will take the applications, ensure that people meet the program requirements and administer the entire program. So we'll have a joint powers agreement that we'll bring forward to you later that will allow that to take place.
Okay, questions, Council? Jay?
So if someone invests and fixes up their home, that would increase the taxable value. I mean,
Market value.
The market value, so they could be taxed more. So it goes both ways, but they get the roof fixed, I guess. So there's not always it's not always a golden side, but it does help people, and it does help maintain our neighborhoods. So I do like the opportunity.
Mayor and
But
council,
it's
in
not always
other
great.
cities where we've done this, it's allowed people to basically stay in their homes. So
Okay.
if there's a catastrophic failure of a mechanical system or a roof leak, something like that, this allows the people to stay in their homes.
And maintain the values of the
Yep.
neighborhoods, yeah.
Yep, so when that's passed on, the next owner isn't faced with having to replace a roof. It keeps that naturally occurring affordable housing in our community.
Mr. Whiting, may I?
Go ahead.
Mayor? So your comment on, like, the improvement would increase the value of their home, therefore increasing their property taxes.
taxes,
You know, my thought process is, the repair itself of 15,000 plus of a new air roof or whatever, I feel would be more burdensome to their finances than their property taxes. So, I mean, that's where I kind of,
You get it back in the end, you think,
Yeah.
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 and then, and I don't know, what are the programs that this county has that the seniors would be able to qualify for deferred taxes, or how does that work?
Mayor and council, I'm not sure what the county's program is, but there are some state programs where seniors, depending on their income, can get their taxes deferred. We experienced that on a particularly bothersome property for some time.
And you can apply that through the city of Shakopee. If you're a senior above a certain age and income, you can apply for the, I think it's 65 and above tax deferral program. That's a state program.
So there, I mean, there's programs and stuff like that to kind of help offset that too. But I mean, the whole, the point of the project is to keep people safe in their homes. And then again, once the property sells, it's going to be in a better condition, improving the neighborhood, the house itself. So
I think we need to back up and not look at it just as when a property sells, because in some cases,
This is what they
it's much broader than that. You could have a fixed income senior whose, furnace goes out and it needs to be replaced and they can't afford it because they're on a fixed income. This is a 0% loan if they meet all the criteria to have that furnace fixed. They might be able to squeak out $50 every 2 months toward payment of this and have it paid for before they move on.
sure.
Or not, it wouldn't
Or
matter.
not, correct.
Yeah.
And that's always an option. So, and I haven't seen the underlying. So if they're making payments and this month, something pops up and they can't make it, I don't know if there's penalties or anything like that, or if it's just tagged on until they move on. If there's a balance remaining, it might be less than that. But then on the other side, you may have, a question that I have is if you have somebody that has a project of $50,000, this says it's eligible for 15 up to a maximum of 35. Could they apply for the 35 and some other funding source for the remaining?
It would have to be their own. Yeah.
Well, maybe it's a son, daughter, or their own bank account or whatever,
Why not? Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think maximum 35, it could be 45.
I mean, it can still remain 35, but if their total improvement is above the 35, are they automatically kicked out of eligibility?
Oh, that's a good question. I wouldn't think so, but.
Okay.
No, I mean, it's up to a maximum of 35. If they have $100,000 of work, that's fine, but they can only receive a 35 to that.
Okay.
You wonder how they qualify if it's that large.
Well, they could be getting funding from others.
Yeah.
It might be a son,
Children.
daughter, it might be a loan or something or whatever.
That's true.
Okay.
Charity, something, yep. She's here.
Do you have anything to add to us?
I don't think so. I think I came up here and you
Oh,
answered it all. You got it all done.
Go ahead, Jay.
Mr. Kurski, thank you for being here tonight. Appreciate that. So we've talked about this program that the state put together, this Metro sales tax of 0.25%. You were here before us and talking about the housing program, and we never finished that conversation. Am I correct? So we're here to finish this tonight, and we've talked about adding this program to it to finalize that. So this would be the 80, or it would be 90% would go towards that program, is what I'm saying, towards the joint powers agreement for the owner-occupied, no, where am I looking here? Let's talk about that program again, just a little brief update on that.
Sure. So based on the feedback that I've heard from council and in working with staff, it sounded like there was support for moving forward with the single-family rehab program, which is an existing gap within not only your community, but across Scott County. There is not any local program for that, so you would be filling that need. What's proposed before you would be to use 90% of your funds towards the single-family rehab program. I just provided a high-level concept here for you based on other programs.
We've
like
talked about that in the past.
Yep, like Mr. Kursky mentioned. And that would allow us to help about 5 to 12 homeowners with this allocation of funds. The other piece of the proposal would be to give some consideration to the rental properties within your community and allow us to use 10% of the funds, up to 10% of the funds for rental rehab to preserve affordable units here in the city as well.
It sounds great. You know, the program with the homeowner moving that house on and keeping the property value there, I think is a great program. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. And that's going to be at the edge of our community too, at the start of this. Is there more planned for that in other communities?
Yeah, I think there's interest really across the county. So as I shared in the proposal, Shakopee, Savage, and Prior Lake are receiving a direct allocation. Scott County is also receiving a direct allocation, and those funds can be used within any community in Scott County.
Great.
Good. Questions? Question, Julie. The way I'm reading this is it's for owner-occupied residential. You were saying rental. 10%. Is that the CDA 10%. Side 10% rental, or is that just any rental property?
So because we're talking about a small amount of money, I would propose to use it on a CDA rental property within the community.
And that's why I asked, because if we were going to use it on rental properties, then it probably wouldn't be anything there for residential.
No. Correct. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay. Now, last question I would have is, in your studies of putting this together, which we appreciate, by the way, the pitfalls. Explain to us the pitfalls that you found in other communities with their programs and what to watch out for.
Sure. I think the biggest thing is to ensure that we have good parameters around eligible projects, making sure that we're clear on what we're going to spend that $15,000 to $35,000, because it just makes it easier to administer, keeps us out of the gray area, and really just puts forward a straightforward project. Making sure that we have the right mechanisms in place to recapture that money at time of sale, which we'll do by putting the deferred mortgage on the property so that we can get those funds back. It's a pretty standard project, pretty standard program that exists across communities, so there's a lot of good examples out there.
So if somebody takes out a loan and they're making payments, as soon as they get the loan, I'm assuming you put that on their mortgage. Mm-hmm. And as they're making payments, once it's paid off, then that comes off the mortgage, that lien comes off.
So it would be a deferred loan due and payable at time of sale or refinance, 0%.
So somebody could not make monthly payments?
We would not envision that.
They would have to save up their money and pay it off and get their loan cleared.
Because it would be on the paperwork for the loan or the house. It would be on the sale.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Mayor and Council, since it's 0%.
It's 0%, yeah.
It's not accruing any interest, so making payments down, you could just save that money and actually invest it so you could pay off the loan sooner if you wanted to. I think that having run a number of these in other cities and states, I think the one downfall, which the seeker kind of covered when we worked on the proposal, is work getting done without permits and getting inspected. In other communities, that's been an issue, and so we wanted to make sure that if people are getting work, it's work that's approved, that gets inspected and is done properly, because there's been other communities where there's been substandard work, and then 5 years down the road, they're coming back asking for more money to fix something. So we wanted to make sure that through this process, whatever got invested was a proper investment.
Well, and I'm trying to make sure that a whole bunch of affordable, naturally occurring affordable housing don't don't all have liens on them. People pass on, and now they become the government's property, and now they're removed from the actual housing stock for the greater use of the people. Mr. Lara.
To piggyback off of what Mr. Kursky said, are there going to be policies in place that you have to use a licensed contractor? You're not going to get the loans and then have your nephew or sibling or children working on the project and just buying materials? Correct. So right now, within all of the CDA's work, we have to check the state of Minnesota to ensure that contractors are licensed property, make sure they're not on a debarred list. We'll continue to keep those practices in place. Sure. Mm-hmm.
So I'm referencing our facade loan program that we have downtown, and we have certain criteria like roofs and doors and windows, exterior type things. And I think you're referencing certain criteria that you might put on it. Would it be something like that? Maybe furnace, I would add furnaces in your thing. Or,
some of that's in here. They don't cover decks.
But yeah, so it'd be certain criteria that would be covered and not extravagant amenities. So.
Yep.
Okay.
Kind of necessity things.
Yeah.
Yep. It's for health and safety.
Safety, yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yep.
Anybody else?
I spoke to her.
Mr. Mayor.
What's the wishes of council?
I will make a motion to approve the proposal from the Scott County CDA for a rehabilitation loan program, prepare a joint powers agreement per those terms to be brought back to both parties for approval.
And I will second it.
Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Whiting?
On something like that, when do we know we're going to get payments and when can we start this program?
So you have received your first payment, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So with your approval tonight, we will work with...
Can you pull that mic closer, please?
I sure can.
It's not bolted down, it's just hard to move.
Thank you. You bet. So with your approval tonight, we will work with staff to get a joint powers agreement in place, and then we'll work to get the program guidelines put together and start marketing the program.
All right, thank you.
So we'll see more detail about what type of project is eligible and what is not.
That would be in your hands. We wouldn't be seeing that back, would we?
You would see it as part of the joint powers agreement.
Okay, I see.
Yep.
Yeah.
That'll come back.
Yeah, that one.
All right, any other questions on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good stuff.
Item 10B. Review preliminary 25-29 capital improvement plan. 10A.
Oops.
10B, I'm at 10 a.m.
The 10, you're right.
10B. Was there
Good evening, Mayor and council members. So tonight we have a workshop on a draft of the capital improvement plan. I'll go through the presentation that summarizes that plan, but if you have project-specific questions, Mr. Jordan, Mr. Kursky, Mr. Egan, they're all here to answer questions you might have. I did provide the full CIP document, so the large budget book. The one thing I wanted to mention is we're using the same software we used in the past, but they switched from an Access database to a web-based version, which has been much easier to use, but it did take a little bit of time to administer, so you might see some of the formatting being a little bit different than you've seen in the past. So starting with a little background and context, the capital improvement plan, so commonly referred to as the CIP, it's a non-binding document of future intent of city capital projects over the next 5 years. 2 years ago, we also created a 15-year plan. We're currently in the process of updating the 15-year plan. Our intention would be to get feedback on the 5-year plan and then make any changes necessary and update that 15-year plan. That will be part of the appendix and the final CIP book. The process and document itself allows the city to plan for larger and more complex projects. By design, the CIP is fluid because priorities can change dramatically from year to year and based on current circumstances. Ultimately, the 2025 projects that are listed will be incorporated within the 2025 budget and then approved with the adoption of that budget. Our purchasing policy does require council approval on anything over $25,000, so any projects listed in the plan would require separate city council approval before those projects were to move forward. Here's the list of the funding priorities. Based on the priorities may change based on the year needed and anticipated funding sources as well. But the full priority definitions are listed within the CIP document, but there's simply 1 have to do, 2 smart to do, and 3 want to do. It's the easiest way to define that. And then here's the tentative CIP schedule. Tonight we have the preliminary review. In October, we'll ask for the CIP to be adopted by City Council. And then in December, the 2025 projects will be adopted with the annual budget. Here's the total CIP expenditures by fund. Over the 5-year CIP, there's $133 million in projects identified, with $43 million identified for 2025. Larger projects are included in the buildings, capital improvements, and the park development fund. I will go through each fund in a little more detail. And then just one slide here, funding source summary. Just wanted to emphasize that all the projects have various funding sources. Property tax isn't a primary source of revenue for these projects. When the source is listed as fund, revenues could include non-specific project-related revenues of that fund. Funding sources include park dedication fees, local, state, federal grants, cost sharing with local partners, franchise fees, special assessments, internal rent charges with various departments, and then utility charges with sanitary sewer and storm drainage funds. So walking through each of the funds tonight, I wanted to start with the capital projects funds, which would include park development, capital improvement funds, and the tree replacement fund. By definition, a capital project fund is used to keep track of funding and costs of larger projects that may span over multiple years. In the CIP book, each project has only 1 project page. But it may consist of portions of that project from other funds. Example could be a street project that may also have a sanitary sewer component or a stormwater improvement. In this case, we're just showing it as 1 project in 1 fund, and then showing the funding sources coming from those various funds. So Park Development Fund, which was established to fund new parks or park enhancements, funded primarily from park dedication fees. In 2023, we received $3.8 million in park dedication fees. Generally speaking, the parks listed here have either received park dedication fees or are contingent upon receiving those park dedication fees to complete. We've identified $28 million in projects in the CIP for park development. 9 projects for 2025, which are the Riverfront Marina, Trail Wayfinding and Amenities, West End Dog Park, Killarney Hills Park, Winmere Bluff Regional Park, or Winmere Bluff Regional Corridor, Riverbank Stabilization, the Cultural Corridor, Valley Crest, Highview, and Highview.
Excuse me, where would we find the various fund totals as of today?
The various fund totals, like what do you mean?
Yeah, like how much is in the park development fund right now?
Well, you could look back at what we had. So I didn't put the cash flows in here this year like you've kind of seen in the past, but if you had wanted to look at the year-end financial statement, those would have the ending balances within there. I didn't incorporate them here within this presentation, but that could be something I could follow up on if you would like to see the different balances of each fund.
It would be helpful because this is showing spending $9 million in 2025 out of the park development fund. And is there $9 million in the park development fund?
Well, keep in mind that each of these will have funding sources identified for that project as well. So if you were to look in the CIP book, it identifies for each project, it identifies where the funding sources are going to come from. And there's not $9 million currently in that fund, but some of these, like the Riverbank Stabilization is a good example since we just went through that presentation. Obviously, it has outside fundings that will be provided for that.
Mm-hmm.
Then the Capital Improvement Fund. So this fund accounts for infrastructure improvements, primarily streets. Funding is coming from a $700,000 capital improvement fund levy, $850,000 a year in franchise fees, municipal state aid construction funds, which average about $2 million a year over the 5-year plan, and then additionally, you'll see other projects that are, or some of the projects that are funded through special assessments. This slide shows 25 and 26 The 27 through 29 slide, or on the next slide, as they didn't all fit on the slide. 2025 and 26 projects include 1.1 million for phase 2 of the downtown project. 2 projects that are outside the annual overlays and reconstruction, which would be Marystown Road and Highway 169 interchange improvements, and then the Old Carriage Court, Old Carriage Road roundabout project. The Marystown Road interchange is funded predominantly by 3.7 million Met Council award and 1.4 million from the local road improvement program. Both of these projects are aimed at improving safety of those intersections. The annual mill and overlay projects included total 6.9 million over the 2 years, and the 25-26 full depth reconstruction projects total about 8.4 million. And so here's the remaining projects, 27 through 29. Sorry, I have a typo there on the top. But the grand total, so this slide just shows the 3 years, but the grand total for the 5-year plan is 46.1 million. Which kind of leads me into this slide. So we've seen the cost of maintaining existing streets escalate pretty quickly over the past 10 years. I put a comparison in here. Wish I may organize this slightly different, but that's okay. But keep in mind that just current roadways doesn't include anything new. If you were to look back at 2020 to 2024, the cost of the annual overlays and reconstruction projects in that 5-year span was 18.3 million. For an average of 3.7 million. In the current proposed CIP, the 5-year plan, same time frame, 39.6 million at a cost of, or average cost of 7.9 million. So we've seen that cost double over that time frame. The funding sources over that same time frame haven't changed much, those being the capital improvement levy, special assessments, MSA state aid, and franchise fees. So we've seen a growing gap between what we have for annual funding and what we have for annual street projects. We are proposing a $500,000 increase in the capital improvement levy from $700,000 to $1.2 million. This wouldn't completely close that gap, but would help prevent that gap from growing further, or possibly even delay having to issue debt in the future. So in the past, we've used one-time funding sources, which would include $7.4 million from the general fund transfers and a $4.2 million bond issue in 2022, which we can continue to do when possible, but it's just not a sustainable solution, especially if that funding need continues to grow over time. The tree replacement fund, financed through fees charged to developers for tree replacement. Projects this fund are contingent upon whatever comes in for funding. I know a portion of these funds are expected to be used with the capital improvement fund with the downtown rehab project and replanting some of those trees. Internal service funds. So we have 4 internal service funds that are included in the CIP. These are funded through rent charges to various departments to provide funding for future replacement of buildings or equipment or information technology or park assets. This allows us to keep the expense amounts in our operations instead of large up and down swings from year to year, keep them relatively flat, and then accumulate enough funds for replacement. Yeah, I'll leave that at that. So starting with the equipment replacement fund. So last couple of years, we've compiled the 20-year equipment list that will be included as an appendix in the CIP book. Actually, it already is, page 252 if you wanted to look at that plan. Previously, this information was in our asset work software, but we wanted to kind of create an all-encompassing schedule in a printed format. We do not have any equipment longer than a 20-year replacement life, so this is every piece of equipment the city owns. And then it also includes the scheduled replacement dates, lives, and cost. The screenshot here is just a sample from the schedule. The listing is formatted to sit kind of side by side so you can see everything together. The average annual cost of the 20-year replacement plan is about $2.6 million. And that would be excluding street and storm utilities, so that would be what's coming out of the departments. For equipment, again, I split these out on 2 slides. I still think it's probably pretty hard to read, but just like I did for capital improvements, but here's the 25 and 26. We have a little over 2 million programmed in 25 and 4.3 in 2026. The larger items being the fire tender truck in 2025 and then 2 fire engines in 2026 and a plow truck in 2025. I did label everything as new, at least in the equipment replacement schedule, not necessarily on the individual pages in the book, but if you were to look at that schedule, you could see what was proposed as new. The police side-by-side, the building inspector electric vehicle, and the fire administration vehicle, they're all, those are the three new vehicles that are being proposed to be added to the fleet next year. These would initially be funded out of the general fund for 2025, so that'll be part of the budget discussion. And then the remaining equipment, not that it's that legible, but the remaining equipment's here. We have seen an increase in vehicle replacement costs over the last couple of years, and generally speaking, for our inflation factor, we've used a 3% for future replacement costs. Those increases, as well as new equipment, calculate out to a little bit over $500,000 in annual rent increase. However, we did sell a couple of fire trucks, and that will help supplant that increase, and we do have a healthy fund balance, so I think we'll be proposing something much smaller than that within the budget. But this will have an impact on annual budgets going forward. As you can imagine, if you've gone vehicle shopping on your own, you've noticed the prices have gone up, and that's what's happening here. It's the easiest way to explain it. Then Park Asset Fund provides the funding for replacement of park equipment, mainly the park playgrounds, et cetera. The 2025 projects include an annual fence and trail projects and replacement of an accessible ramp at Schleppler Stadium. Total projects slated for 2025 is $175,000, and then the total over the 5-year plan is $2.4 million. The IT fund pays for our annual technology costs. These would include the costs of our Logis provided services, hardware replacement costs, software costs, and network costs. The 2025 budget includes a couple of exceptions to the annual costs, which is $50K for fiber redundancy for Fire Station 1, and then the ERP system, which was approved with the budget last year, so we're not asking for any new funding. It's just council approved. The money needed to be transferred to the IT fund, so it was available for next year if this project moves forward, as it's been put on hold at this point. In 2025, the project cost is $1.1 million, and the total over 5 years is $4.6 million. The building IS fund pays for city building and replacements. Again, I have just the 2 years list on this slide and the remaining years on the following slide. 25 and 26 projects include the hub, which is contingent upon securing funding from outside sources. $950,000 for fire station number 2 remodel, which would convert the temporary living quarters into permanent dorm rooms to allow for overnight staff. And then $500,000 replacement for a police department roof. And then the remainder of those projects are on this slide. Over the 5-year plan, about $19.3 million projects in projects program. 2 remaining funds, and those are our enterprise funds. So these funds pay for their capital needs through utility charges. So the rates of these funds must be sufficient to fund the capital needs as well as operations. The sanitary sewer fund, projects are listed here, $700,000 in projects for 2025, which include trunk sewer extensions, the SCADA system expansion, truck replacement, and L16 dual force main improvements. The largest expense over the 5-year plan is the L16, which has $2.5 million planned over 5 years, which handles the majority of the sewer usage of the downtown area. And the last one is storm drainage, $5.8 million worth of projects, including $1.5 million in 2025. Those projects include the annual storm pond improvements, Wynant Acres, Boiler Springs area, Blue Lake Channel restoration, Quarry Lake erosion improvements, and a skid steer replacement. The largest project that's programmed here is the Blue Lake Channel restoration and regional pond improvements, totaling $1.5 million, which is broken down in 2 phases. The first phase, planned for next year, restores and stabilizes the erosion near Arbor Bluff. So with that, that concludes my presentation, but I can open it up for any questions you might have.
Questions, council? Mr. Delaney.
Sure, quick question. On the capital improvement levy, there was a proposed increase from of $500,000 to kind of help close the gap going forward. Is there another higher? I know it kind of sounds kind of counterintuitive, but is there optimal value to kind of keep that gap closed going forward, or how do we come up with $500,000?
I think it's just making a step in that right direction. I mean, if you wanted to close the gap completely, I mean, there's, 7.9 million is the average over the next 5 years, right? So we're probably taking in 3 to 4 million, maybe 5 in other sources. So you probably have a $3 million gap you're trying to make up each year. And I think the original intention, at least with the 2022 bond issue, was, okay, when we ever have these gaps and we don't have another way to fund it with some sort of one-time source or, barring increase in the levy, we'll look at issuing debt and trying to do it that way. But I think at this point, with the costs going the direction they are, you don't want that gap to expand further, which it has over the past few years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Lara?
Can you go to the IT slide real quick?
Yep.
I'm just curious, are some of these numbers just like placeholders? The one that's kind of stood out to me was printer replacements. So each year we got 20,000, 20,000, 20,000. Are those just like placeholders, or are we anticipating $20,000 worth of printer replacements each year?
Yeah, it's roughly the annual need. I mean, we may have a situation where we don't do anything this year, but do 2 printers next year. But that's generally the cost that the IT director has come up with. That will be that cost.
Every office has a printer.
And some are relatively flat. I know the computer replacements, that'll go up and down depending on the number of computers we're replacing in that. But the general consulting services, some of the networking services, those are pretty consistent from year to year.
Okay, questions. I'll ask my questions, I guess, but nobody else has got any. So I went into your award-winning tax receipt tool, and I put in my property, and it shows like where each little piece of my property taxes go to, and it includes the building fund, the park asset fund, the capital improvement fund, and it includes all of these things, equipment fund. So, but that's not necessarily the case for all properties. If a property is in a TIF district or received abatement, they're not paying into these funds, are they?
Anything that anyone that's, with the property tax funding source, for example, the capital improvement levy of $700,000, which we're proposing at $1.2 million, anybody who's paying property taxes, there's a portion of their property taxes that are going into it.
Right, but on a TIF district, that is not going into the actual fund. They're paying that tax, and it's going back to pay off the dollars that were spent, their future taxes that were spent on putting the infrastructure in.
Only the increment. They're still paying the taxes that they were paying before, and that's all still going into the funds. It's the increment.
Yep, I understand that.
That is not.
Yep.
So, but when you say that it's not going in,
it's not going in there.
A portion is going in.
So when you take a field that doesn't have a road in it.
Let's say it's okay. The field pays $5,000 in taxes currently, and we're going to then TIF that, and let's say the value then is $25,000.
Okay.
So $5,000 is still going into the funding here.
Right. And now that they have roads that they didn't have and didn't pay for because they get the tax back to pay for them roads, that tax dollars from that increment is paying for them roads, for the debt we took on to pay for the roads. So they're not paying for the services to plow the roads either. And they're not putting new dollars into the fund to fund these things, like a household in Shakopee is.
Well, I would say that that's a limited time. Let's take the 4th Avenue TIF, for example, or what have some people have called the Amazon TIF.
That was an abatement, I believe.
No, that was a TIF.
Was it a TIF? That was an 8-year abatement.
Sam's was an abatement.
Okay, go ahead.
So it was a TIF. That money actually went to the county to pay for 4th Avenue. That was paid off in 5 years, 5 years.
Well, I think it was a 7-year TIF, and it was paid off in 6.
So it was paid off in 6.
Paid off a year early.
So at first, that funding was a very small amount that the tax value of that property was. In 7 years, that tax property value has went exponential and is now part of the reason why, when we talk about the budget that we're bringing up, we're able to keep things as low as we have been able, because those TIFs that we do put into place, yes, there is a short-term amount that they are not paying for all of the services they might receive. So if they have a fire there, no, they're not paying for that. If they have police action there, no, you could say that they're not paying for that except for what they originally did. But in relative terms, you know, that's part of what's allowing us to grow and allowing us to have low taxes that we're going to have in the next discussion.
And we improve that road without putting it on the backs of the taxpayers.
And that's the other thing. So 4th Avenue, we would have had to charge everybody in the city for 4th Avenue's reconstruction. By TIFing it, we did not have to do that. We used the increased taxes to pay that.
Like we paid for our roads in front of our houses.
Portion.
Yeah. Okay. The other question that I have was, how do we get away from properties paying into a capital improvement fund for projects that they may not see? You know, I mean, we're using a projection out 15 years. Now we're going to raise it by 500,000. How do we do a better job of making sure that the people that actually use the improvements pay for them? And I know that's difficult.
It's actually a good question, and it's a philosophical question.
Difficult question.
You know, essentially you have two ways that you can pay for something. For our roads, for example. So we can charge people today for the future use of those roads, and we do that through the tax levy. Or we can actually bond for those roads, and then the people that will be using them in the future will be paying that as part of their tax levy. It's just a philosophical question. Either way is acceptable. And, you know, from my perspective, I like the idea of bonding because we have a very low amount of debt as a city, as we all know, as we see every year from our audits. And then it's putting the burden of using those roads on, or paying for those roads on who are actually going to use them. So we certainly can do that as well.
The follow-up question that I had in that thought process was, if we, you know, we talk a lot about creativity and being innovative, and this is going to be one of them specific funds that are going to take some creativity long term. When we set up the IT fund, all these internal funds, the purpose was to prevent spikes in the levy. That was the general purpose behind them. And we saw the IT fund, a $250,000 levy impact. We're seeing the capital improvement fund, a $500,000 impact. So the funds aren't functioning as designed.
They're functioning as designed, and for 98% of everything, it's working actually as designed, and you're part of the people that put those in process. You know, for example, we're going to have to buy, you know, fire vehicles in the future. Yep. You know, we're not going to have those big jumps. But yes, there are. When we're totally reconstructing our financial system, which is what the $250,000 was, that's not part of that. It's literally something that was never conceived as being part of that process.
And technology.
We got to think of the future, and the technology, like you mentioned, wasn't there.
Always throws a curveball in there.
And then, you know,
but
adjustments have to be made to that.
Let me continue on this thought process, because what I'm trying to accomplish is what the original intent of internal funds were for and how they operate. So the question that I would ask, and I'd be curious to find out how that would work out, is what would happen if we did a hybrid of both? If we did, because if you look at the capital improvement plan in totality, out to 15 years, you have this bubble. And, you know, if you go out 5 more years, that bubble is cutting half. What would it look like if we did a hybrid of a combination of both internal and bonding through that bubble? And could we, or would it, or could it, level out that levy
Nice.
for a period of 10, 15 years or whatever? And because that is the ultimate end result and goal of what them funds are for.
Yeah, the answer is yes, we could do that. And
I'd like to see what that looks like.
okay, sure, yeah.
You know, I'm not sure if I'm all there yet, because I don't know what it would do to long-term levy, to the projects and everything else. I mean, we've got to maintain our infrastructure. It's only going to get more expensive, and we're going to have to figure out ways to be creative. And you know, one of the things, I'm glad it didn't miss my mind, but we talked a lot as a council and staff about the street impact fee of development. And this is a prime example of why that issue is so important. You know, we see, you know, we're seeing an improvement in a intersection in Southbridge because of the development. We need to expand these intersections to be able to well, we're seeing it on Marystown Road, right? 3 roundabouts, big dollars, and these are impacts from growth, higher traffic volumes and stuff like that. So, and safety. So we need to figure out how, you know, what we can do on our end, and we need to be pushing to get them impact fee legislation passed.
Yeah, and so one thing to keep in mind, which I normally remind and I didn't this time, is that really when we're talking about the funding piece, we're only looking at 2025. Mm-hmm. And those other pieces are kind of moving pieces on the chessboard, and they may or may not be there if there's something funded. But yes, you know, we kind of did that with the 4.2 million bond issue in 2022. We were absorbing some of that through the bond issue, so we wouldn't have to put so much on the levy in those particular years.
Right.
We certainly can do a bond issue for a couple of years and then make up that difference that we've been talking about, as opposed to putting it on the levy in the short term. And then that goes more to then that those who actually will be using those will be paying for them.
Well, and I think you would still have a portion of the levy dollars like we have today going into that fund also.
Yes, sir.
So you'd have to have a hybrid, and we'd have to see what that numbers all work out.
We're doing the hybrid now.
Certainly look at that.
We're not bonding.
Yeah.
Right, we're not bonding this time, but we talked about this in 2022 when we did
Yep,
bond that. We
yep.
knew we were going to have to look
Yep.
at it again in the future. And
Yep.
so this is kind of getting us through this 2025 year. We're going to maybe talking about bonding in the future. We talked about it then.
I think we need to take a look at a hybrid option and see where that, I mean, we really can't decide if we want to do something like that without the information. And all we're doing is asking them to provide that information.
Yeah, we can certainly put something together in that regards. We'll take a look at what the amount would need to be, and then some options for you.
What the long-term levy amount would be.
Yes, sir.
What the debt payments would be, where, you know, that would be incorporated into the levy also.
And when what potential for that bond would be probably hit. You know, there's going to be a year when it's going to be a bigger chunk. You know?
Yes, and if you look at the outlying years in here,
Yeah, it's in
the
there.
bubble is down. So what you would see then is them outlying years, you would see the actual expenditures going down on projects, but you'd have this dollar amount that would still be going to either fund future projects in the levy or the debt payment.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I'd also like to see that, because when can we actually get that back for council to look at? Because to get to a reasonable, stable property tax, I think that would actually help get there. I mean, right now we're seeing maybe a decrease next year, but my concern is further down the road at some point it may pop again, and then we've lost that decrease every year. So I think this may get us to a reasonable, to kind of bouncing around the lower end, get us to something that's more reasonable, stable.
I think there's a lot of unknowns in the future from things that we can't control, be it federal or state governments. But this is really our infrastructure and our high importance of infrastructure. So it's kind of important for us to figure out a decent plan long-term.
So I'll add just a couple. All good comments, and I actually agree with a lot of them. I do think you're going to run into the situation where you've got attack at it from both angles with debt service and probably the levy, and even a debt service means eventually there's a levy to go to repay that debt service. And I think just to kind of focus things a little more, it's really the street projects and it's the existing street improvements just to maintain the current one. So I'm not talking about the projects outside that you're adding new streets. Well, that'll eventually be existing streets too, but the cost of just to maintain the existing streets, that's where you're seeing that cost escalate. And that's not likely to come back down. So I think trying to increase the levy and also looking at.
Yeah, and we're not looking at the 30% reduction in that cost from assessments either. We're seeing the total price of what it's going to cost.
Yes. Yeah, and then you would also have
30% of that is
yep.
financed from private property owners who benefit from it.
Yeah, for the reconstruction, the mill and overlays, that there's no assessments that go towards them, but you would also have state aid, the $2 million in state aid, the $850 in franchise fees, but you're still.
So we need to look at the total picture here,
yeah.
and that's what I'm asking for, and I think Mr. Reynolds knows what I'm asking for. Are we? Am I clear enough, Mr. Reynolds?
Yes, sir. We got it.
And the council can look it all over and see what they want to do. What's the, best option. All right. And CIP projects, I've said it for years that I think our park plan is way too lofty and expensive. I still believe that. I'd love to see some of these costs come down, and I'd like to see the improvements at least a minimum of 20 years, hopefully 30 years, and some of the parks that Mr. Kursky's staff has put together, some of the modern stuff looks to be, if the plastics are as good as they say, look to be long-term, so I think that's a good idea. And some of our natural spaces and stuff are low on maintenance, and hopefully they're long-term, and some of that stuff long-term will reduce the cost, so that's good. But, there's projects that I don't want to spend that kind of money. I certainly don't want to spend $1 million on 8 or 9 signs. I just have a totally different vision on the culture corridor, and I get it. I don't have to agree with everybody. That's fine. Anybody else?
Well, thank you for the presentation.
Yes.
Love numbers. So.
Oh, you're lucky enough I have another presentation. Be careful what you ask for.
Yeah. Item 10B, 2025 Budget and Levy Overview. Mr. Reinhardt. Let me find my paperwork on that one.
Okay, so tonight we have a second work session to discuss the budget. So this will be a budget overview of the 2025 levy and budget. At this point, we still have a number of moving pieces, but thought it would be beneficial to get something in front of council and get council input at this point in time. So generally speaking, our budget objectives remain unchanged from the past few years, which include continuing to be one of the lowest tax communities in the metro and continuing to grow our tax capacity of existing and new property. We'll continue to be transparent and to make decisions with the future in mind to ensure the city's ongoing ability to provide quality services at a reasonable price. As we go through this budget process, we'll continue to put information on our budget page on the website, as well as providing additional information in any way we can. Certainly, we'll continue to update our award-winning fiscal fluency tools, which is our property taxpayer receipt, and then our budget board that have been a relatively successful way to communicate our information in the past. This model, I showed this with a long-term financial plan, but illustrates how, illustrates or sets high-quality city services as the foundation of a healthy and growing community and shows where external forces and government action might intervene. Those high-quality services drive population growth as more people and businesses want to be part of our community. Population growth drives growth in the real estate values, whether that be new development or existing property. The growth in real estate values ensures rising tax revenue, which pays for the inflation-based cost increases of our high-quality high-quality city services with minimal impact on the property tax rate. The cycle is the foundation of our annual budget development and helps identify and explain influencing factors. Our role in the cycle is ensuring that we are providing those high-quality city services, influencing the mix of property types between industrial, residential, and commercial, and then determining the appropriate way of how those services are paid, whether it's via taxes, user fees, or other revenue sources. We all have the ability to choose where we live, so making sure that we have strong infrastructure, safe neighborhood, and amenities, makes people want to live here. The city's taxable market value is $8.35 billion, which is an increase of $573 million or 7.4% from last year. These are all based on county assessed values that they've provided the city. Apartment, commercial, and industrial market value grew at the fastest rate. New construction accounted for about $250 million of the increase in taxable market value. With residential, if you look at that, that increased by 5.1% below what we saw in other property tax types, meaning generally speaking, you'll see a larger share of city taxes being paid by non-residential properties or some of that taxes being shifted to those property types. At a high level, just wanted to cover some of our initial expectations. In total, we are expecting to see an increase in non-property tax levy revenue sources, which is good because that means that's less that would be required from property tax revenue sources. Our agreement with the Shakopee Public Utilities provides a percentage of their revenues to the city. We expect that to continue to grow as their customer base grows. For Sand Venture, we anticipate increasing the revenue forecast to reflect the proposed fee schedule presented to council earlier this year. Investment earnings continue to grow based on our current rates and our investment mix. We believe we have the ability to raise those budget targets. And then the last one, building permits. We aren't necessarily planning for an increase in development, but analyzing whether or not we want to be a little less conservative with those budget revenue forecasts and then increase that revenue forecast for next year. On the expenditure side, like other cities, our operational costs are primarily driven by personnel. Wages and benefits account for about 70% of our city's general fund costs. Our initial assumptions going into the 2025 budget would be a 3% cost of living adjustment and then a 15% increase for health insurance. We are continuing to explore a health insurance pool with Scott County and other cities in Scott County. Our hope was that we'll be able to move it forward with that in 2025. I'm not sure if that'll happen or not, but based on some early numbers, we expect that if we move forward, the cost would be slightly less, but pretty comparable to our current arrangement, although saving money over the life. Tentatively, we're also looking at utilizing a portion of reserves that we originally set aside for potentially moving to self-insuring our health insurance that might offset some of that increase. The city does have 3 union contracts, patrol sergeants and public works. All 3 of those contracts had agreements settled earlier this year. So 2025 will be the first budget year that these agreements would be included. Council also approved the hiring of additional full-time firefighters and then an office assistant that weren't in the 2024 budget. These positions will be budgeted for a full year in the 2025 budget. This will impact, obviously, wages and salaries, but also some of the operating costs like uniforms, training, equipment as well. We do anticipate proposing 1 new employee in 2025, which would be an additional fire inspector position. This was identified as a position recommended by in 2025 by the Citygate study for both succession planning purposes and then additional preventive safety inspection purposes. So in addition to personnel costs, there are 2 areas that we're seeing increasing costs for next year, and we've also seen them over the past couple of years, and I also just covered it in the CIP presentation. But the first one being equipment and vehicles. 3 new vehicles are being proposed, which is a police side-by-side, which would be used for larger entertainment events, such as concerts at the amphitheater. We anticipate using tribal funds for that purchase. A new vehicle for the building inspector and a proposed fire inspector position, which we plan on offsetting with a potential increase in building permit revenue. We've seen a pretty significant increase in replacement costs of existing vehicles, so that would also need to be reflected in our annual rent charges. And then street maintenance, again, we're seeing a gap kind of widen for that, so proposing an increase in the capital improvement levy. So here's where we're at today. Again, there's still a number of moving pieces and a work in progress. This is not a staff recommendation at this point. It's more or less just where we're at right now, or at least we have a plan to get to this point. In total, we're at a 1.3 million increase in the levy, or 5.18%. This includes about 950,000 for general fund operations, or 4.25%, if you look at it from percentage-wise, and then the 500,000 in the capital improvement levy. This would be offset slightly by a decrease in debt service. If you recall, in April, council set aside about 350,000 of the positive general fund balance to use towards debt service rather than levy that debt service payment.
Question, is the 2016 abatement 2.1 million, is that the community center?
So yeah, that would be the community center. Yeah, that's that bond. Yep.
Okay.
So this chart here shows the city tax rate over the past 10 years, including what's estimated for 2025. Another disclaimer on here, the one item we do not know yet is what we'll get back for fiscal disparities or be distributed back. So I've just left the number we had last year. I do think that number will increase just based on the numbers I've seen being contributed, because if the contribution for commercial and industrial all went up, I would expect our distribution to go up as well. So this might reduce that tax rate a little bit further. But based on the preliminary assessment value data and what we have currently in for a levy increase, we are projecting the levy to decrease slightly for next year. This is kind of what we use as the benchmark, or at least what we looked at as the high point coming into this budget as where we want to be. So basically consider that our upper threshold when looking at the levy for next year. The chart above, or chart shown here, provides information on the median value home and city property taxes paid since 2020. Orange bar and the amounts on the left axis represent the median value home. The gray shaded area represents the property taxes paid by that median value home. And again, median value home, if you lined up all properties from the lowest to the highest, it would be the one in the middle. That increased by 338,400 to 350,700. That's a $12,300 or 3.6% increase. For the median value home, this would equate to about an increase of $10 or 1.1%. If there was no change in the value of the median home, so if it was valued at the same amount as last year, it'd be a tax decrease of about $26 or 2.9%. As you recall from the previous slide, I saw the tax rate slightly decrease for next year. And then updated the slide for this year. I think I might have shown it with a long-term financial plan too, but compares the cost of city services for a $300,000 home utilizing 5,000 gallons of water. So it would be property taxes and then sewer and storm utilities. Annual cost for Shakopee is the lowest compared out of all those comparison cities. We're at 1,096, and the other cities range from 1,290 to 2,040. Our costs actually went down for 2023 since our tax rate went down and had pretty minimal changes in sewer and storm rates. The only other city here listed that had a reduction in their tax rate when I looked up these numbers was Coon Rapids. Definitely compare favorably still to our peer comparison cities. And then the budget calendar moving forward, not a lot of comments on here, just to say that the preliminary levy will have to be adopted in September. After that September, we cannot increase the levy, we can only decrease it. County will again mail the notices for 2025 in November that show the estimated taxes, and then we'll come back in December to ask for final approval. So with that, looking for any discussion or council input.
Questions?
One of the important things to once again reinforce is that this is just where we are currently. You know, obviously we want to go back and look now with you know, the bifurcated system of levy and bonding possible. My goal would still be to have this be lower than last year as far as our taxes are concerned. But that being said, we'll go back and take a look at it and put some numbers on the table for you. This should be the highest that we're dealing with at this point, which at this point in the game is pretty good. But as always, fiscal disparities, fiscal disparities, fiscal disparities. We will see what happens when we get our money from fiscal disparities.
Looks good.
No questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Reynolds, if you'd remind me when I'm meeting with our neighbors to harass them a little bit about how our taxes are lower than theirs.
It's one of my pure joys of life.
This takes us to item 11A, City Bill List. Any questions on the bill list?
No questions for me.
Okay. Item 11B, Liaison and Administration. I think we're on this side, are we?
Yes.
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Lara.
All right. I was busy. Monday, July 29th, officer swearing in ceremony for Officer Hernandez, Smith, and Veerling. So welcome to the force. That evening I had a school board meeting, and at that one was reviewed earlier I mentioned that they did they were going to do, what did they call it, a reunification training exercise, and this is just going over the results of that. Long story short, it was a success. They did a mock gas leak, and all the parties involved would know how to react to a situation like that. Let's see. Then August 4th, Sunday, I attended the Shockwaves Adaptive Skiing out at Quarry Lake. If you have not been to that, what that is it is their para, quad, blind, and neuro disabled people that volunteers put them in these specially made apparatuses, and then they take them around the lake a couple times. It's actually really cool to see. There's people there's 400 participants that come over 5 clinics, and there's people that come from almost 3 hours away to come do this. So pretty cool to see. All volunteers that run it. And then Monday, August 5th, I attended the community meeting for the anaerobic digestion facility out at DEMCON. This will be the 4th in the country being built, and basically what it's going to do is it's going to be able to take further waste that normally goes in the landfill, and they're going to make 2 byproducts from it. One is renewable natural gas, and they had a container of it on the counter. Basically, the guy described it as it's what's in your Brita filters. It's going to be able to be used for soil remediation. So I thought that was pretty cool. 2 products are going to come from that. And then with the location of it and then the new ORF, they're going to be able to partner with SMSC. They're going to be able to share products between each other. The ORF is going to be able to provide them stuff they'll need for their digestion, and then some of that byproduct of the soil improvements they'll be able to use there too. So good partnership. And then yesterday,
they have a cost on this facility? I'll ask them when I go out there.
No, I did not. They did not mention anything about cost, but 2 years of construction. They are planning to be operative in 2027. No odor. I did ask if there's going to be any odors. No, it's fully contained, so no odor issues.
Although it's out of our jurisdiction if they do, so.
Yeah, technically.
It's Louisville Township.
Yep. Let's see, yesterday, El Fogon ribbon cutting. That was in the morning, and then everyone that was there quickly went over to the Legacy Central ribbon cutting, or groundbreaking, and then that last night was Night to Unite, of course. So that's what I was up to.
The school district, I read somewhere that they're putting a levy together on the ballot for November. Referendum, I'm sorry.
Yes, that is the capital projects levy renewal. Basically, it's the technology aspect of it.
So how does that work? It would be no impact because it's just a continuation?
Correct.
Okay.
So, but if it does not pass.
Well, actually, it should be a reduction because it's the same dollar amount and there's more properties now than there was when it was originally passed?
Correct. I don't think they're proposing an increase, but if it doesn't pass, then obviously they're going to have to make cuts, but because there is more, like you said, more
Can you
households.
find out more on the questions
Sure.
I just asked?
Yep.
I'd appreciate that. Anything else?
No.
Very good report. Thank you. Councilor Contreras.
Thank you, Mayor. I did attend the swearing too of our 3 new officers, and again, welcome to the force. We did the Shakopee tour that we all went along and saw all the great stuff that is happening here in Shakopee. Yesterday was a busy day. We did the ribbon cutting for El Fogon, and again, we were running to our next, that was the ribbon cutting, and then we ran over to the groundbreaking of the Legacy Central, which we are excited about. And then last night, we did at least my team was at 6 different parties for Night to Unite, and that kept us busy for a little bit, so.
Anything from scale?
No, that will be this Friday.
Okay. Mr. Wade.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
On the 20th, I had the opportunity to welcome our state's public transit operators to Shakopee at Canterbury Park for the 2024 Minnesota Public Transit Association's bus rodeo. It was held out at Canterbury, as I mentioned. Minnesota's best transit operators and drivers showed off their skills. We had a 3-peat winner. Evidently, if you know how to drive the long bus, you know how to drive the long bus. But Chris Daniels Sr. of the Rochester Public Transit won again, 3rd time. So great time. Welcomed a lot of people to Shakopee. They enjoyed their stay, and they actually Canterbury had the rodeo that night, so it kind of fit right in. Then on the 31st, I attended the MVTA board meeting. A couple things of note. We had an opportunity to grab 4 Ford Transit vans, which will be utilized, hopefully, most of them in Shakopee. We're going to be having those discussions about some added microtransit in Shakopee that's coming up here on the 20th of
These
August.
are the smaller buses?
Yep, the cutaway buses, they're called, yeah. The smaller, what we used to call the dial-a-ride in Shakopee. Yep. And this is kind of that microtransit to fill that, those smaller links, you know, that the bus routes don't take. And then last night, Night to Unite, great time, several events. We all split up and went to different areas. I went to one out on the outskirts, Boulder Point area, you know, and they had actually this was Maxine Court. I mix them all up, but I met Maxine. I don't know if you know, she lives out there, but they had some drone footage of the coyotes, and there's about 10 in that picture. Wow. So there's plenty of coyotes in town, but
the flooding didn't help. It pushed them all up.
Pushed them all up, but yeah, there's some parts of our community have a lot of wildlife. Yeah, but, yeah. That's all I have.
Very good report, Mr. Warding. Thank you, Mr. Delaney.
Okay, got to visit Benedictine. This was on. They were voting that day, and I'd like to thank staff that goes out and does the, I guess, absentee ballot voting. I think they had a great number of votes, 83 or 53, somewhere there.
Yeah, 83.
So that is a great program, and they are actively involved, so that was a good time. City tour, we went through that, also the welcome the new officers. We had Night to Unite, great feedback. I think there was a gentleman that owns Lou's Barbecue, I believe that's the name of it, for one of the sites we went to. Loves the new park addition, the one that has the I guess, fitness features. Mm-hmm. And that sounds like it talks to some other people, same thing. Love the trail system and our green space.
How's the barbecue?
Well, of course. So that was good feedback. Did get questions about when San Ventura is opening. So that was a...
I did hear that too.
Yeah.
At some point in the future.
Promise the water will be wet at some point.
Let's see. SPUC meeting, we had that, and also had the annual MMPA, Minnesota Municipal Powers Association. We had that meeting. There will be there's no rate increase from MMPA, but I'm not sure how that impacts the ratepayers as of yet. When we go through our budget, we'll find out how that works. But 169 Coalition will meet to kind of go through the results of the survey that was put out next month, but that's about it.
Very good reports from council tonight. Thank you all. My report, let's see here, July 18th, Thursday, July 18th, we had our staff and I had a quarterly meeting with Scott County. Nothing major. We just went over basics, talked about the flood, some housing issues, just the basic stuff. Make sure that we're on the same page on things that we can and do partner on. 29th was police swearing in, 30th city tour. The 31st, talked to a potential business coming to Shakopee. It's a daycare business. I'm not versed on daycare, so there's not a whole lot I could offer them. Is it a center? It's a bigger national chain. Looking at possibly locating in Shakopee. Let's see here. Second, I met with the gravel pit folks and Mr. Kursky and got a preview of the potential development that might come forward on that. August 6th, Legacy Central CDA 55 plus, like the Marge Henderson plus their office space on the central site. Good to see other council members there and staff. Then we did the night to unite last night. Got home and the sun was coming up. Me, Mr. Reynolds, and Chief of Police were out all night. Boy, I've been hung over ever since. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. We're good boys that night. So a lot of good feedback from folks. Yeah, there's more good than bad, and that's always nice to hear. So today. This afternoon, I met with Congresswoman Andrew Craig out at the RTF. The Chief of Police State was there, other mayors and other chiefs, and the topic of discussion was, well, public safety in general, mental health issues, and there's, what do they call it, congressional allocation? Is that the word, Mr. Reynolds?
That is what is now called earmarks. Yes, sir. It used to be earmarks, but that's
congressional allocations for the training facilities range where them rubber blocks, the backstops, they're having some issues with them. They're very expensive. B, when it's time to change them out, it's more expensive to actually get rid of them than it is to purchase them. And they had some fire issues with them when the police do rapid fire drills and stuff. Still in the funding package. We will see if it makes it through. She felt pretty confident that it would. So that was a pretty good conversation. I actually enjoyed that conversation. I think that's all I have for my liaison report. If I missed anything, let me know. All right. Item number 12, other business. Mr. Whiting.
So we've all noticed that our community no longer has a newspaper. We've talked about that. Actually had a conversation. Somebody wanted the city to get into the journalism business, and I didn't think that was a good idea. But there is an aspect to our newspaper that we're missing, and it's the demographic data, the deaths, the births, the marriages. And I'm wondering if we could talk to staff about, in our communications department, if there's any way we can collect this data and set up some sort of website so that future generations can know this demographic data and be able to research it. And since we no longer have newspapers, just kind of want to put that out there and see if that's something that our communications department can come back with a proposal or a thought. There's no way to collect that in the future.
Yeah, everybody's missing any kind of media. It is kind of terrible, but I don't know what the answer is.
Right, yeah, it'd be great to...
I mean, you can go to the Ballard, Sunder, and McNerney and look this stuff up, but I mean...
There's one general collection point.
We need a separate journalist-based news outlet for Shakopee. Absolutely.
That's not city business, but our department, our communications department does a great job with communicating our news, and but some of these little details are going to slip away.
Totally agree, Councilor Whiting, and not having a newspaper is an incredibly difficult thing for all of us, and for example, we rely on the newspaper to get word out on things all the time, which doesn't exist for us anymore. We've been talking about beefing up the stuff that we do to try to, we're never going to be able to fill the gap, but try to get some more information out there to the public. Let me bounce some ideas around and see if we can, and talk to other communities and see what they're doing as well.
We got an innovative, smart staff. They might know more than I know.
I'm just thinking of, since you brought up, and once again, we have no time to think about this, but I'm thinking, is there journalist people in our high schools that are thinking about taking journalism and want to dabble?
Provide an outlet.
There's an
That
academy.
actually had been a topic of conversation as well. As you know, one of the premier newspaper reporters in the area now works for us, former newspaper reporters, and she has a very strong interest in the field still. Obviously, we are partnering with the school district as part of the Human Services Academy with Scott County. We had kind of thrown something like that out, not so much of them doing the reporting, but trying to use them as the muscle behind some of the other stuff. So yeah, we'll have some more discussions on all of those issues and see if we can't. And I'll talk to the superintendent of schools as well, and see what his thoughts are, because it is every community needs
Absolutely, it is.
needs a newspaper, and it's a real hole, and it's
Be a newspaper anymore, but some sort of outlet that's not of the social media. Has the realm of truth in quality journalism. But.
I don't want to see the whole thing fall on our staff to put together some kind of a publication in paper form to get out to everybody. That's really not
it shouldn't be paper anymore. But.
we could not do that.
Yeah.
I mean, our communication staff is well engaged, but maybe we can use the expertise our staff has to find some other avenues that might not have been explored yet. We'll certainly discuss it and brainstorm a bit.
Appreciate it.
Anything else? I have one. State. Basically, what it comes down to in my mind is we all know the state had a big push last legislative session on the missing middle housing and taking over local zoning control and all kinds of other crazy stuff, right? That didn't just go away. It's just paused.
Delayed. Yeah.
And so we need to be, thinking about that. So your homework, I would say, would be to think about the next conversations I have on this with the state. It's always easier to come in with potential solutions for consideration than just saying, no, we're not interested. So let's think about potential solutions. One of the items that I was talking with staff about is there's so many redundant, crazy stuff in the building codes, and I learned through my checking into it that our state legislators don't even read this stuff. It's just administratively adopted, so they don't even know what's in it. And these same legislators that don't know what's in it and never read it are the ones pushing to tell us what our zoning controls should be and what some of our building codes and stuff should be. At a minimum, maybe they should read it. And at a minimum, maybe they should look to see if there's things in there that are hampering housing construction and existing housing affordability that don't need to be in there. Now, we're not talking about safety items.
We're talking about the universal building code that's across the board and across the nation, right?
That nobody has read. It's all administrative. And it's international, so it's, I mean, these are codes from other countries that just don't apply. And yeah, we've got to start somewhere, and they need to put some effort into this too, instead of just saying, Jay Whiting, you guys are the bad guys, we're throwing it all on you, that's just not right either. So, I mean, we need to think about what is it that, if there's over-regulation, I'm all for reducing regulation if it makes sense. We're not looking to take away regulations that make sure there's a header where it needs to be and the concrete's this thick and, you got a gas guy working on the gas or whatever. Safety stuff is pretty obvious, but there's a lot of redundant stuff that just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. That really don't need to be there.
A couple comments, if I may.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's our city staff that should be looking at the International Building Code.
No, it would be state legislators.
Well, yeah, they could definitely take a look at some of that. But in that line, I do want to thank our own Shakopee Representative Tapke for stopping that middle housing thing. He knew what it would do to Shakopee.
It's coming back, though.
And we actually gave him that, he knew how we felt, and he took care of it, so appreciate that. It will come back in a different form, and I think there was some good in that could be utilized. It's just the way it was formatted that the bad outshone.
Well, if you can jot down what you think would be beneficial, that would be very much appreciated. If you all want to do that, and since we can't have that conversation outside of this chamber, just give them ideas to Mr. Reynolds, and that would be helpful in our discussions with the state when they come back around. It would really be nice to, and we're working with other communities too on some of these issues too, so it'd be nice that we're on the same page, and we can come in with some solutions instead of just saying, get out of our sandbox. Thoughts, questions, comments? No? Okay. Anybody else?
Don't forget this one.
Oh. Thank you. That was your job.
I forgot that. Sorry.
One call out, the general public is invited to a grand opening of Windermere Park. It's at 1850 Windermere Way, Wednesday, August 14th at 4 p.m. Ribbon cutting ceremony, welcome to the new neighborhood park. I'm sure there's more information on the Shakopee's website if you need more information, but there you go. I don't know.
Park on the hill?
That ain't gonna be able to be visible, so. August 14th, 4 p.m., Windermere Park, 1850 Windermere Way. Did I pass the audition?
Good job.
Would you like to put it on the podium there and get the X on it and be able to blow it up? We're going to go way out of our way for you.
Tune out on that one, yeah.
Oh, I don't know. We don't have the regular person. We'll see.
Yeah, we might not have the person in the back to do that. We'll see.
Right there?
I think someone's going to have to, there we go.
There it goes.
You'll have to move the microphone.
Mic,
There you go. All right. And we'll just leave that on there as our ending note. How's that sound? Thank you.
All right.
All right. If there's no other business, wishes of council.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr.
I'll make a
Lyle.
motion to adjourn to Tuesday, August 20th, 2024 at 7 p.m.
Is there a second?
Second?
Mr. Delaney seconds the motion. Any discussion on the motion?
No discussion.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Awesome, everyone. Thank